Hey, Mikey back here. Today I want to do a short video on the preparation of our wood products before they go into the spray booth. You'll probably see, I might even record some of the spraying too, but right now what I want to talk about is how we prepare the wood before we put our prime coats on. I want to start by a little embarrassing thing here. I'm missing a tooth here and a couple teeth up here. And I don't like videotaping. It's embarrassing to me to kind of look like this. What happened was a little while ago, a couple months ago, I had infection down in my jaw where my roots or some of the teeth had infection where the roots were down in the jawbone somewhere, I'm not sure, but I had a lot of infection on some teeth in my mouth. Did not know it, didn't have a toothache or anything. But what happened, I was working in here one day and I started getting dizzy, my vision was blurring, I started passing out. Like I was thinking I was having a heart attack, and it turns out kind of that's what was going on. The infection from my tooth or teeth had gone down into my heart and infected my aortic valve, and that was causing all kinds of problems. And long story short, I went in, I had to have open heart surgery, emergency open heart surgery to replace my aortic valve, which had been infected. And I had a stroke while I was in there, but I spent 3 months out of the shop, a little over 2 months in the hospital, and then a few, maybe 3 weeks, I think, in physical rehab. But what they did, they told me I could not have any dental work done for 6 months. They did not want to take any chance of getting any more infection on that new valve, the aortic valve they replaced. So for 6 months I've had to be without a couple teeth in my mouth. You don't notice the ones up here on the upper left, but this one here in the front is quite obvious, and it's not something I'm proud of right now, but this is the first week that I can start going to a dentist and getting an implant or whatever they're going to do to replace these teeth that are missing. So you can laugh at me if you want. Call me the toothless wonder, okay? At any rate, that being said, paint preparation. This is a door, it's a shaker style door. It's typical of the most common doors we do today, which is not part of the subject, but just identifying what I've got in my hand here, what I'm going to demonstrate to you with. This already has been built. It's run through my wide belt sander. This happens to be one of a dozen different materials, or more than a dozen materials that we build doors out of. And I don't want to talk about the different species of wood, whether it's oak, cherry, this is double refined MDF, which is great for paint products, by the way. Oak, cherry, maple, hardwood, softwoods, whatever. The preparation is pretty much on all the doors that we build, or cabinets or whatever. So what we do, after I get it all assembled, we run it through a wide belt sander, then I take it on my sliding table saw, and using very high quality blade, triple chip blades, I'll cut this to exact size. The reason I'm pointing out high quality blades, it makes a very good edge on here. I don't want to see a rough edge from my saw blades, so it's going to take a lot of sanding. I don't want to see kerf marks from the saw blade, the teeth on the saw blade. So I spend a lot of money on sliding table saw blades to ensure that I get as best possible cut on here before I have to go sand it, all right? Let's put it this way. This is going to get sanded by hand. I have a horizontal, it doesn't matter, you don't need to see it. I have a horizontal edge sander. I have a variety of different machines that can sand this, but I normally sand my door edges with my disc sander by hand, all right? I have a good feel for it. I don't like going on the horizontal sander and moving it because it can remove a lot of material very quickly, and what you can do, you can start sanding a door out of square. And there's not much sense going my beautiful sliding table saw, making a perfectly square door, and then getting rid of it by running it across a horizontal edge sander. Even though I'm using a 150 grit, you can start to take these out of square, these square doors. So I do it by hand. And That's why I want a good quality blade, give me a good edge, so I don't have to do a lot of hand sanding. This is not going to remove a lot of material. I mean, it takes a little bit of practice. I'm not saying it's rocket science, but when you're sanding edges, you don't want to be rounding and all. You gotta get a good feel for holding it flat, all right? And I don't go like this. I like to go and I can look down and I know I'm holding it nice and square to the edge when I'm actually sanding it. And I don't want to sand it because I've already routed these edges, so I'm not going to demonstrate this other than to say this is a good high quality. It's made by a company called Merkur. It's got a built-in transformer because it's got a, what do they call it, low voltage motor on it. It's a DC motor, direct current. So it plugs into AC, transformer turns that into DC, makes for a much lighter and more maneuverable. All that translates into more control, a better sanding. Okay, a better sanding technique or procedure for getting me ready for my paint, all right? So, at any rate, I've already done my disc sanding. Suffice to say, I like Merkur. I love this. This is about $600. I like that. And I like the Merkur discs. I use pretty much just all Merkur, all right? These are, you can see on the back, I'll bring this over here for you to see. There's a box of 150 grit, all right? This is made by Merkur. It is a high quality, made in Finland, all right? The land of fishes. At any rate, it's a high quality disc. It pays to use quality discs, all right? They last longer, they do a better finish. You don't get a lot of grit coming off of there, getting pushed into the wood or whatever, which causes scratching when you're trying to sand. Makes a little swirly marks. I don't have any of that. By using high quality discs and a high quality machine, right? So, I've already sanded. So now my next thing, I've got a router. I break over my edges with this machine here. I don't know if you can see too well, but there's a little tiny radius on here. It might be like a 30-second radius, a metric, I'm not sure what it is. We call this a breakover bit, all right? All right, so what I do, after this is all squared up and it's all been sanded with my disc sander, I'll take this router and I route all the way around. I route the four corners and then I'll lay it on its face and its back and I'll run around the perimeters like this and I'll put what I call an eased edge on there, slightly round, all right? So that's where, right now I've got, I don't know, it's 50 or 60 doors in here. But at the moment I've got about 3 or 4 left here. So I'm going to just show you how I go. After I've done that, that's not ready for paint yet. That's a pretty decent router, this Makita, all right? And it's got a good carbide cutter on it, but it does still sometimes leave just a little bit of a chatter maybe. I don't feel it, but once you go paint you might see it, the light hitting it might, so I like to come follow it up by going over top of that with these. Once I take these discs off and they get used up, I'll take them, I'll just fold them in half, and I'm going to just go over that routed edge like you see me doing right now. And this way, if there is any chatter, I'm removing it, okay? And I'm also putting the same scratch pattern on that little radius that I have on all these surfaces because I'm using the same disc. The router, when it cuts in, might be a little bit too much of a polish. It might be burnished a little bit, if you want to use that word. And by going back over top of it with this piece of paper, I'm ensuring that I've got the same scratch pattern on the edges that I have on the surfaces, all right? And now, also critical, these little points. I'm going to take my paper and I'm just going to, I don't want to round them over a lot because this is a shaker style and I want square corners, but I don't want a real sharp little point. So I'm getting rid of those little points just by kind of folding the paper a little bit and just kind of hitting it and getting rid of that little bit of a point there, all right? And the reason I say that and why you want to ease these edges, I'm going to work while I'm talking, all right? If you were to leave these sharp edges the way they come off the saw, real sharp, and I mean they're sharp enough you can almost cut your finger when you run your finger off the way it comes off the slider. But that may be a nice look, very contemporary, maybe modern look or whatever, but it's not good for your finish. And the reason of that, as the paint dries, if you've got a real sharp corner, the paint's going to pull away from these corners. The paint's going to wick away from the corner if it's real sharp, leaving very thin, very minimal amount on that point itself, which means you don't get good coverage, all right? So you want to go around with a piece of paper and a router, break those edges, give yourself a nice little round, eased edge. Like I said, not a lot. The style doesn't want to see a big radius on there, but just enough so that that lacquer does not pull away from the corners and create problems down the road, all right? So now, same thing here. I can't route these because there's no bearing made to go into these that'll fit inside here. So this sharp edge I do have to break by hand, which I'm not doing right now. I'm hitting the flat part of that, the sticking in of the frame. Now I'm going to take it, I'm going to break those edges over. And they're not going to be broken quite as much as the outside corners because the machine did that. But again, I do not want to see a real sharp okay? I don't want to see a sharp edge on here. I don't want to have a problem with the paint pulling off those corners, all right? And now I'm also coming back because even though these panels were sanded before I assembled this door, sometimes we get a little bit of glue squeeze out in the corners, or we drip on here or whatever, or water on the damp rag. So I've gone over this panel, but because it's a radius, it doesn't quite get into the corners. So when this damp rag hits the wood, it raises the fibers a little bit. So if I go back over that with this, that little corner that doesn't get hit with this, that will have raised fibers from the damp rag where we wipe that squeeze out. So what I'm doing now, I'm just kind of hitting those real lightly, try not to scratch it, which you won't do much scratching with a 150 grit. All right? I like to just get in there and just kind of take away that little bit of a grain raise that the damp rag might have put in there. So that's about all I do. Oh, in the back we also have to break these edges. All right? I don't want to be talking and then not break over my edges and get into the spray room and hit it with a gun, lacquer, spray gun, and find out I had not broken the edges because I was distracted making a video. Okay. These are small details. You might not think about it, but very critical that you do these steps. You don't just get it all sanded, squared, rounded, and head into the spray booth. It's critical to treat these edges. They're just as important as the flat surfaces. Okay? If you don't round these corners, if you don't break over these long edges, you're going to have problems, and we don't want problems. All right? So that's that. That's ready to be blown off. And let me do one more here. Okay, I'm going to hit the edges of the frame. They did go through a shaper when I did the stick and coat. And I have high quality cutters. These stick and coat cutters are a 6-piece set made by a company called Freeborn. And it's running on a 12 horsepower shaper, and it does a beautiful stick and coat. But it still leaves a little bit of, even though it feels smooth to the touch, I like to just hit it with this 150 grit so that I don't get as much grain raise when the lacquer hits it, all right? If you soften the edge of those pieces, it helps a lot, all right? So again, here, let me hit the inside corners that this didn't get to. Just in case when we went with a damp rag to get any glue squeeze out, I don't see that afterwards. Because if I didn't do this right now, That little bit of a radius in there that the sander doesn't hit, where it got damp, you'll see that when the lacquer gets it. If you didn't know, when water touches, or any moisture touches raw wood, it raises the grain a little bit, which is the reason I always use primers, all right? They sell a lot of products, finished products. In fact, the products I use, they say they are self-sealing. So in other words, you don't have to put an undercoater or a primer or seal on first. You just use that and then lightly sand it and put a second coat. I like to put the primer coats on, undercoaters on, and I use the same manufacturer always. Whatever my finish is, I use the same brand on my primers, just to make sure there's a good interaction between the coats, chemical reactions, all right? So, but yeah, if you were to get this damp or whatever, it's going to raise the grain a little bit, and that's going to affect how the primer. That's why I like the primer. The primer is also like a filler. It's got solids in it, all right? And when you go to, it fills in slight imperfections. This is not porous at all, but if you were using, say, oak or something like that, very, very porous, it's not going to fill that grain in. But something like maple, or a tight coat made, wood like cherry, maple, poplar's not real bad. It does help a little bit to fill in slight imperfections or a little bit of open grain, all right? And also, it helps take care of grain raised from a damp rag used to get some glue squeeze out. So again, it's important to sand that off a little bit. That helps a little bit. And when you put your primer on, you're going to be able to sand that. The primers powder up real nice when you sand them, which you don't get with your finish coats. That's why I don't like self-sealing. You use a self-seal, they don't powder. They're more difficult to sand, and I just feel you can't get as nice as the finish. Plus, I don't believe those finish coats, even though they say self-sealing, I feel the primers bite into the wood and give me a better adhesion to the bare wood. There's no problem with the finish coat sticking to the primer because that's a good chemical bond. That's not so much a physical bond as it is a chemical bond. But when you first put any material onto the wood, that's not a chemical bond. That's going to be, this is why you don't want to go over 150 grit on most woods, because you go to a 180 or 200 or higher grit, you're going to be polishing the wood, burnishing it, whatever word you want to use, glazing it over, and you're not going to get that physical bond. There's not enough there for it to bite into. The 150 gives you enough bite for the primers to bite into, to grab hold of the wood and stay on the wood without being scratchy. If you go less, if you go down to a 100 or a 120 a grit, lacquers are thin. We're only putting anywhere from 2 to 4 mils maximum on our products at the thickness of the material. We're not going to fill in a lot of scratches, all right, with that kind of a finish, all right? So that's why you don't want to get too coarse with your sanding. I could say, wow, I could sand it with a 50 grit, and I'll get great adhesion, but it'll look like shit. It'll look like a railroad track or something, all right? So 120 or 150, depending on the wood. Most of the time in here at 150 grit. So, oops, did I finish breaking these? No, I didn't. I went over them, but I didn't. I better go over it again just in case I forgot. If I didn't sand this one, and it butts right up against the door adjacent it, you'll see the difference in that edge. One that was sanded after routing and one that was not sanded. Okay? Now I'm going to hit those little corners. This is tedious and time consuming, especially when you've got like 50 doors, all right? Doors and drawer faces. But it's a step you don't want to, as tedious and time consuming as it is to break those edges and prepare it for spraying, it's an important step that you do not want to miss. You don't want to skip that step. You don't want to rush a job. It takes a lot of time to take our wood, get it all ready, cut it, mill it, stick and coat, grout, shape, whatever you have to do, put this all together, and then to skip a step putting a finish on and impair the quality of your finished product just because you want to skip a step, all right? This is probably the most important step of the entire door. Other than high quality joints, good selection of wood, high quality machines. I guess everything is really important, but at any rate, I'm ready to go into, I'm going to blow these off, get them wiped out. I'm going in the spray booth. I got to get sprayed, but just want to reiterate one more time. This is a $600 machine. It doesn't require a $600 machine, but in here, where we're doing a lot of quantity over and over again, it helps to have a lighter machine, and it does a superior finish on it, so much better than the $100 or anywhere from $80 to $150 disc sanders you might find it like in the big box stores or whatever. I've got a bunch of those. I have never used one since I turned this machine on. $600 well spent, but the machine is not as important as the disc itself. High quality discs. Break your edges, sand them, ease those edges over, and make sure everything is spotless clean before you put that primer on. Blow it down, vacuum it off and on, get it all ready to put your finish on, and get your primer coats on. And I'm going to take you in a spray booth. You're going to see me putting the primer coats on, sanding those primer coats, and then putting the finish coats on. That's it for this.